last game in our series, we're going to see a generational clash between Andersson and Peter Lecko from 1996. And Peter was definitely young grandmaster in this time period. So let's see the solid nature of Ulf against a young and talented player. We're getting more of the I'm okay with trading, getting a roughly equal position in the opening. Critical, what do we do here with white? We've got to worry about our d4 knight. We'll just take. Lo and behold, we have ourselves another ending. King's on d1. And Lecko was a solid player in his career, but I gotta say, if I'm playing against Ulf, I'm not allowing a position that isn't any fun. So I feel like I'm gonna get tortured. Simple development. Where's the best place for our c1 bishop? e3, controlling the c5 square, a theme we saw in an earlier game. Protecting the knight. And this next move is critical for white, as we want to fight for key squares, get some space, and generally hold back the pawn structure since it's symmetrical. f4. Now our king has a place to castle by hand where it's close to the action. Keep the integrity of the pawns. We can always play h4 at some point, but we need our e and f pawns together. We have the potential of pushing the e pawn forward in the future and making a passer, so a little bit of an imbalance. But for players like Ulf, it can mean a lot. Stop you from use of c4. Now we eye the g5 and c5 squares. No way to prevent that. Would you like to take our knight? We have the bishop pair in the open position. No? Okay, well, our king's getting better. Don't want to deal with any discoveries. Still have pressure on the b pawn. Black decides to go knight b4, as any defense of the b pawn, the knight was going to be left hanging out to dry on c6. And critical moment. What do you do here with white? If you're a pause your video type person, it's a good moment. Lots of options here. But our f-pawn is extremely important. And Ulf decides to change the character of the position. Bishop versus knight. Which minor piece is better and why? Well, in this case, the knight can't really affect the bishop, but the bishop affects the knight. It is an open position, hard for the knight to move due to the weakness on b7. And slow, steady improvement. Testing the position a bit. And only now, where the knight can move, does Ulf decide to take. You go, well, why didn't he take immediately? And this is often a question I get in my chessable books. Well, why did you recommend this move? The engine says this one's better. The engine says. Oh my God. Well, if the engine is evaluating 6 different moves at roughly 0.00 to 0.3, just because it's evaluating one at 0.3 does not mean that is the best move for human over-the-board play. Now, it's a tough concept to understand, but I promise that if you begin to understand the difference in moves that set the most practical problems for your opponent, you'll be well on your way to chess mastery. And in this case, bishop f3 changed nothing in the position. Ulf was waiting to see, what is my opponent going to do before going into this ending. And it should be mentioned if that keeping two rooks on the board gives black better holding chances, instead of playing rook takes d5, as our rook can invade to c7. Looks pretty good. What's the worst thing in our position here? Our h-pawn. So we'll look at some point to potentially jettison that pawn in order to cripple black's structure, or just get rid of a weakness. So black waits around. A little bit of improvement. Well, no hurry, but it'd be nice if we could fix the queenside pawns. So we'll play b4. b5 would be nice. So he plays it, but space left behind. Rook c5. Don't recommend pushing to d4. I'm going to go e4. My passer, because it's working with the pawns, is far more dangerous than yours. That can be corralled. So h6. Sometimes waiting is the best policy. With patience. And if it were me, I would continue to be patient and just go back and forth, as black is doing. And it looks like white has given him some counterplay, but nope. We'll just come back and force you into defense. Finally, black got tired of waiting around here, as white's potentially showing the plan to double up on the G file. So G5. So surely this is a draw. White's king's still better. Has every reason to continue to try to press here. D4, E4 again. And just a little bit of something to work with. Notice how after these trades, black's position is just a little bit more awkward, a little bit more difficult to hold and get coordination to defend d5. No way to hold it. The far more important pawn to worry about in the position. Keeping an eye on that base pawn. Can't have him. Notice the tactical threat. If rook takes e4, rook e8 check. Important move. The idea is if rook takes b4, rook d6. Again, not looking to repeat. King b6, rook b3. Dual threats, taking the a pawn as well as rook c6. And to me, it's one of my favorite things, seeing the technique of a player in such a dry position get the most out of it. Critical moment. E5. And it's hard to give up pawns. It really is. But Ulf's got it covered. And the king is looking worse and worse here. Few repetitions, and finally, when he gets on the edge of the board, stay there. Check. You can have the B pawn. So the entire game, all we wanted to do was push our passer. And there is no way for black to hold here, as the pawn runs free, and that clean transition. Be like Ulf. Grind, grind, grind. Absolutely love doing this series and looking at the games of the legendary grind player, Ulf Andersson. Do openings matter? To a degree, depending upon the style of player that you are. But if you're interested in just getting solid positions and trying to outplay your opponent based on technique, study the games of Ulf Andersson. Hopefully this series has shown you that solid can be tough to face. Because in all these games, Ulf was playing very strong players. And even in this last game, we have a generational clash. Beautiful. Thanks for stopping by.